Yiddish.Nahum Gergel was a Jewish rights activist, humanitarian, sociologist, and author in Yiddish. Nahum Gergel is best known for his thorough statistical studies of anti-Jewish atrocities that took place in Ukraine in 1918 to 1921. Gergel received a traditional Jewish education, then studied law in Kiev. In 1914 he graduated from Kiev University and moved to St. Petersburg, where he became active politically as a Jewish rights activist and as a humanitarian. He lived in Russia, Ukraine, and eventually Germany, where he emigrated in 1921. Gergel died at the age of 44 of a sudden heart attack, and was buried in the Weißensee Cemetery in Berlin in 1931. Jewish aid organizations. In January 1915 Gergel joined the EKOPO, and in September 1915 he was elected its chairman. Starting September 1916 Gergel worked in the EKOPO Central Committee in Petrograd. In May 1918 he was elected president of EKOPO and remained its leader till 1921 when he left Russia for Germany. During this period Gergel also worked in the governing board of ORT. In July 1921 he was elected chairman of IDGESKOM. During World War I Gergel formed a group of activists that fought against accusations of Jews being German spies. He organized resettlement to Poltava for thousands of Jewish families that were deported by the Russian government from the near-front Kurland and Kovno regions. Political parties. In his youth Gergel participated in the Bund. Later he joined the Zionist Socialist Workers' Party and was elected to its Central Committee. After the February 1917 revolution in Russia, Gergel was elected as ZSWP's representative in the Petrograd Soviet of the Workers' and Soldiers' Deputies. After the union of ZSWP and JSWP, Gergel became a member of the new party's Central Committee and soon was elected to that party's All-Russia Committee. Jewish Ministry of Ukraine. In early 1918 Gergel was appointed chairman of the Bureau of the Jewish Ministry of Ukraine. After the Getmansko-Ropadskaya's coup in April 1918, Gergel became effectively the head of the Jewish Ministry of Ukraine. Anti-Jewish pogroms. Severe anti-Jewish pogroms erupted in 1918 to 1921 in Ukraine. In this period Gergel was an active member of the Pogrom Victims Aid Committee. At the same time he worked as a chief of the Pogrom Relief Department in the People's Security Commissariat. In December 1919, Gergel was appointed representative of the Red Cross Pogrom Aid Committee, where he worked until the Soviet government liquidated the committee in May 1920. At the same time as he was working in different pogrom aid organizations, Gergel tirelessly collected materials and statistical data on anti-Jewish pogroms. Results of this work were later published in Europe. Gergel's study of pogroms is very often quoted as the proof that the Ukrainian National Republic Army, led by Simon Petlura, incited and took part in pogroms. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, in the early text of his book, 200 Years Together, says that, according to Nahum Gergel's 1951 study of the pogroms in Ukraine, out of an estimated 887 mass pogroms, about 40% were perpetrated by the Ukrainian forces led by Simon Petlura. In the later editions of the book, Solzhenitsyn replaces reference to Gergel by words Jewish sources. So are some other authors who quote Gergel's figures and statistical analysis without mentioning his name. For example, G. Kosterchenko in his Stalin's Secret Policy, Power and Anti-Semitism. It's worth noting that the study referred to by Solzhenitsyn was carried out by Gergel in 1918, early 1920s, and was first published in 1928 in Berlin in Yiddish. Gergel's figures on the pogrom, which are generally considered conservative, are based on the testimony of witnesses and newspaper reports collected by the Mizrach Yiddish Historische Archive, which was first based in Kiev, then Berlin, and later New York. The English version of Gergel's article was published in 1951 in the YIVO Annual of Jewish Social Science, titled The Pogroms in the Ukraine in 1918 to 1921, Emigration to Germany, Humanitarian Activities. At the close of 1921, Gergel arrived in Berlin, where he continued his diverse political and activist work. He started with forming the OZD Committee abroad. In 1922, he was elected to the committee secretariat and assumed the role of editor of OZD Bulletin. At this time, Gergel worked in Mizrach Yiddish Historische Archive, where he stored all materials on anti-Jewish pogroms he had collected. In 1923, Gergel was elected the Secretary-General of ORT. In 1925 he visited the USA as an OZD delegate. In 1926 Gergel was appointed as the JDC expert on the Russian Jewish affairs. Gergel pioneered the inception of Allgemeine Enzyklopädie. This project was the reason for his next trip to the US. Work in YIVO Institute for Jewish Studies. Gergel was one of the founders and an active member of Institute for the Jewish Studies in Berlin. At the YIVO conference in Vilna in October 1929, he was elected a member of the YIVO governing board. He worked as an economics statistics section editor and contributed to the YIVO Blätter journal. Gergel's socio-economical study of Russian Jews in the early Soviet era was published in his book On the Situation of Jews in Russia in Yiddish. Publications and unpublished work. Gergel collected more material than he was able to publish during his short life. His large monograph, The Jewish Ministry under Getman, was never published. Book in Yiddish, Gergel, N. Die Lage von die Yidden in Russland, 259p. Warsaw, 1929. Article in English, Gergel, N. The Pogroms in the Ukraine in 1918 to 1921. YIVO Annual of Jewish Social Science, New York, 1951, p. 237 to 252. Article in Yiddish, Jews in the Communist Party and the Communist International. Multiple articles in Yiddish in YIVO Blätter. Several important articles by Gergel were published in the New York paper Zukunft in 1920s and early 1930s.